Hi, Darren from ProtoPie here, and in this video I want to share with you some tips and tricks and things that I wish I'd known when I started using the software. Some of these things are fairly hidden features, but definitely all incredibly useful to know. So without further ado, let's get into the first tip. When you add triggers and responses, you get these default names. But did you know you can actually rename these to anything you wish? So here I've got two stacks which I'm going to rename just by double clicking into the field. This one I'm going to call dialogue. This one I'm going to call cancel dialogue. And you can do this for the responses as well. Dialogue opacity to 0. So that's one thing. The second thing you can do is you can actually group together stacks as well. So these two stacks all relate to a dialogue. So I'm going to shift select both of these and I'm going to command G, group these as well, and you can give the group its own name. So I'm going to call this Organise Interactions. So there you go, grouping inside of the interactions panel. Down in the corner here we have the variables panel, and there are two kinds of variables you can add. A variable which can be accessed by all scenes, and a variable that is just accessible within this scene. If you decide to use a variable that's just accessible within this scene, and we can reference that as a local variable, and then you decide at a later date that you want to change that to a variable that can be accessed from everywhere within your prototype, you can't simply change it from the local variable into the other kind of variable. The only way you can do it is you have to delete the variable and you have to create a brand new one. So be very careful when you're using local variables to make sure that you definitely don't want to use them in other scenes in the future, because if you have to change these variables, you're going to have to update every single reference that variable accesses as well, and that can be a real pain. When you come to use ProtoPie, you're probably thinking about doing lots of custom animations, but did you know that there's actually some built-in transitions inside of the jump response inside of ProtoPie? So let me show you that now. So on this prototype, I've got this intro screen which goes to this login screen and then transitions into the home screen. So I've used a jump response here that's going to execute when I fill in the login credentials. And it's going to use a slide-in transition, and it's going to slide in from the right to the left. There are a few other transitions you've got available to you. You've got fade, pop, slide out, and flip. And there's also a none option if you want to do your own custom transition as well. Within the transitions, you have a number of directions that you can have the transition happening from. So here we've got right to left, but I also have options for left to right, bottom to top, and top to bottom. So let's have a quick look at how that works. Okay, so I'm going to put in my username and my password, and then when I hit return, we're going to get our transition. So there you go, simple transitions inside of the jump response inside of ProtoPie. So here I've got a pretty standard button. We've got a text label and we've got a rectangle. And this is a pretty typical way you might build a button inside of ProtoPie. But I'm going to show you another way of handling the background. So we're going to group these two together. And this will be typically how your graphics might be imported from tools such as Sketch or Figma. So, and in tools like Sketch, you will have a background object to make up the background of your button or whatever component you happen to be building. But in ProtoPie, it's got some slightly different functionality. So I'm actually going to use my container to define the fill and the shape of the button. So let's go over to the container properties panel. So I'm going to change the background color of the container to the red color, to my rocket red. And we're going to make sure that fill is 100 so we can see that. And we're just going to hide this rectangle for the minute, just going to hit the little eye icon. So you can see now that I've got a square rocket red button, and that's coming from the color that I've just applied to the container. But we haven't got the rounded corners, so we need to apply the radius to the container itself. So we're going to add a radius of 24. So as you can see now, I've got a button and a text label. I now don't need this rectangle, I can just remove this rectangle, and I've got a component using less objects, less layers inside of it. And this is quite useful if you don't want to have the hassle of when you're doing constraints and things like this. This is now going to, because it's the actual background of the container itself, it's always going to be filled no matter what shape you make of it. So there you go, that's adding fills to containers inside of ProtoPie. So here I've got a standard iOS switch. So let's just have a quick look at this. This is just acting as you would expect an iOS switch to act. It's got two states, it's got an on state and it's got an off state. And that's being controlled by these two conditional blocks. So I'm looking for the off state, and then I am moving the circle and I'm changing the background color. And then that moves it to the on state. And then when I'm moving it back to the off state, I'm also moving the circle back and I'm changing the color back to the gray. But there is another slightly quicker way of doing this where I don't need to remember all of those values when I'm setting it back to the default state. So I'm just going to turn off this move and this color response. So this is controlling it to going back to the off state. I'm going to add a different response. I'm going to add a reset response. So I'm going to make sure I've got my switch background active, and I'm just going to add reset. And then I'm going to select my button group and I'm going to add another reset. So if we now preview this, I can go to my on state, but when I go to my off state, it also works, but it's actually just resetting the two values instead of me specifically telling it to go to the particular position or to change to the particular hex reference. So reset's a really useful response and is very much overlooked. So think about where you might be able to use reset in your prototypes. As of ProtoPie 5, we've now got team libraries and personal libraries. So you can now create a library of components and upload it to your ProtoPie cloud. And that's all well and good. But if you want to move that library, or especially if you're using teams, if you're on one team and you want to move to another team, or if you've got a personal library and you want to give it to somebody who's not part of your account, you can't extract a library, you can't copy a library, you can't save a library like you can in Sketch, for example. Your library is kind of locked into your account. So what I do is I keep a separate Pie file. So it's just a regular Pie file with all of my components in as well. So it's a little bit more work to keep your Pie file and your library file up to date, but at least this is a file I can share and I can pass on. You obviously lose the connectivity between what you have in a library as far as when you update components, then they're going to be updated inside of your Pie files that are using those components, but at least you can share your components with others if you need to. So something worth bearing in mind. Sometimes you just want to put together a really quick prototype and you might only have imported flat PNGs like I've got with this standard header here. But within this header, I've got a number of buttons. I've got a back button and I've got a plus button. So what you can do is you can kind of make your own hotspots like you would see in Vision, for example. So I've just got a rectangle here and I'm just going to place that over the plus button, and I've got something set up here already. So when this rectangle gets tapped, it's just going to increase the opacity of this card. So if I just show you this card, so that's going to just increase its opacity to 100 so we'll be able to see it. But I don't want to see this horrible pink square, so what I might be tempted to do is to take the opacity down to 0. So if we preview this, you'll see that nothing's happening. And that's because when opacity is set to 0 for an object in ProtoPie, it's no longer interactable. So how do you make this invisible but still make it interactable? So there's a way to do it. So we'll bring the opacity back up, and what we're actually going to do instead is we're going to take the fill opacity down to 0 instead on the color fill. So now the fill of the color is 0, but the opacity of the layer is 100. So if we now preview this and hit our plus button, you can see that our card appears. So this is a really quick and easy way of adding hotspots to a quick prototype to mimic that kind of InVision capability. So here's a little tip about persisting data between scenes. So the way ProtoPie currently works, scenes are independent of each other. So there's no obvious way to pass, say, input text from one scene to another, but that's where variables come in. So I've got a very simple prototype set up here. I've got two scenes. I've got the scene 1 where I've got an input field, and I've got scene 2 where I've got a text label. So on scene 1, I've set up my input field to jump to scene 2, so it's using the jump response, and it's going to assign a value to this global variable I've got here called my text, and it's going to grab the text that I type in the input field from input 1, and it's going to save it in this variable here. This variable is a text variable. When the jump response jumps me to the second scene, I've got a start trigger, and this start trigger is the start triggers basically run automatically when the scene loads, and inside of this there is a text response which is attached to this text label. So when this scene loads, it's going to grab the text from the my text variables, this global variable. As you can see, I can see it on both scenes, and you'll see it on all of your scenes, so it's available for access for all scenes. This text label is going to reference the my text variable, and it's going to insert the value that I type inside the label. So let's try that out. Go into preview, and I'm going to type ProtoPilot, and I'm going to hit return on my keyboard, and there you go. You can see that my text has been transferred to the label on the second scene. So this is how you use variables to persist data across scenes. So when you bring graphics into ProtoPie and you add your triggers and your responses to your objects, the triggers and responses are actually attached to the objects themselves. So if we look at this tap trigger, it's actually got a target of this image underscore build tab, which is this graphic here. So if I decide at a future date that I want to change that graphic, I might do something like go and find a new image, bring it in. Okay, and let's just resize this, roughly the same size. Okay, so, but there's nothing attached to this image, it's attached to this other trigger. So I'm going to have to go into this trigger, tap trigger, and I'm going to have to change it to the other one, and then I'm going to want to delete the old image, and then I've successfully changed it. And this is of course a fairly trivial example, but there is a much easier way of doing this without messing up all of your triggers and your responses. So if you just select the image that you want to change, and over here just underneath the preview is a replace option. So if you hit replace, you go into your file system, you can then choose another image, bring that in, and I haven't had to touch any of the tap triggers or any of the responses because it thinks it's the same image. So this is the way you would do it. Obviously this is reliant on your changing, that's updating images from one to another that's of the same size, but this is the way you would do it to get around not messing up all your triggers and responses. So I'm going to import a design from Figma, and I'm going to use the Figma importer, and I'm just going to check these two boxes at the bottom here, and I'm going to import this login screen. Okay, I can instantly see that there's a few issues here which I didn't realize. So this logo is far too far away from this graphic here, and I've noticed the ordering in the layers is kind of in the wrong order. I like my layers to represent the hierarchy is the same as the visual hierarchy. So you can see my email is the first input field, then password, but you can see these are transposed, and my continue button, which is at the bottom, is kind of at the top. Now I could of course reorder these here, but there is another way of doing it, and because I've checked those boxes on the importer, so I'm just going to switch back to Figma, and I'm just going to reorganize these. I'm going to fix this logo, make that a bit more relatable, and I'm just going to put my email field here and my password field here, so that I've got everything in the order visually as it is in the hierarchy. Now I'm going to come back to ProtoPie, but I've already got my screen imported. But if I go to File Import, there's this sort of hidden re-import from recently used. So it's going to remember what I imported previously. And because I checked those extra boxes, as far as which one of those boxes is to control the ordering of layers, it's just going to update my file based on the changes I've made. So if I choose re-import from recently used, it's going to connect to Figma. It's going to re-import that screen. And as you can see here now, my changes have been updated. So the logo is now a little bit closer to welcome back, and you can see that my email, password, and continue button, primary call to action, are in the correct order. So that's re-import from recently used. Now, when your graphics are imported from tools such as Figma and Sketch and Adobe XD, they come in for the most part as bitmap graphics. But you do have the ability to import SVG, but it's a little bit more hidden, it's a little bit less documented, and unfortunately at this point in time it's not part of the importer. But here's how you would go about bringing SVG into your ProtoPie file. So I've got this logo here, which is just a regular PNG, so I want to replace that with an SVG. So there's a couple ways I can do that. The first way is I could go to Figma, and I could click on my logo, and I can just right click this, come down to copy paste, and choose copy as SVG, and there's a similar option in Sketch. I can then just come back to my ProtoPie file, and I can just hit a regular paste, and I'm going to get this SVG, and you can see it's really small, and that's because SVGs are by default at 1x pixel density, and you can see my iPhone 11 Pro is at 3x. But there's an easy fix for that. We can just, with the SVG selected, we can just making sure that we've locked the aspect ratio on the size. I'm just going to multiply that by 3, and then we're going to get that at the correct size. And because it's an SVG, it's resolution independent anyway, and I can just place that in the correct location. And now I've got my SVG, and you'll see there's an icon slightly different with this little circle here, meaning that it's an SVG. So that's one way of doing it. But as you can see, there was a few steps I had to kind of resize and all the rest of it. So let's just delete that for a second. The other way of doing it is I've already saved an SVG out from Figma. So I've just used the export command here, and I've just chosen SVG, and I've exported the logo from Figma to my file system. So I'm going to select my logo PNG, and I'm going to use the replace button. And I'm just going to navigate to my logo SVG, and I'm going to open that. And now my logo is now an SVG. You can see it's got that same SVG icon, and it's the correct size as well. So there's a couple of ways there for you of bringing SVGs into your ProtoPie files. So I've created my prototype, I've got it all ready to go. I want to share it, so I'm going to want to upload it to ProtoPie Cloud. So I would click this button and upload it to the cloud. I've already uploaded this particular prototype, but what I want to show you is something actually in cloud. So let's just switch over to the file in cloud. So this is my Pi that I've uploaded in cloud, so it's just in my Chrome browser, and by default it just says over here on the left hand side, this prototype was made with ProtoPie, the interactive prototyping tool for all digital products, which isn't incredibly useful, but there is a way you can edit this. So if you go into the little 3 dots and you edit information, you can actually type whatever you want in here. So it could be a message to a stakeholder, so prototype updated with the following changes, and I use this as a change log for when I'm change 1 updated button color. So you can add quite a lot of text, up to 1,000 characters, and I can save those changes. I can also change the title here to something a bit more human readable. And save the changes. And now I've got that text kind of represented here. So when you share this cloud file, so if you're going to share this prototype with others, you would just kind of get the URL, or you can grab a share link from here, and then there's a whole bunch of settings you can do there. But effectively, when they load this file up, they'll have the text in here, and you can do things like set instructions as well. Sometimes I put instructions in these things to let people know what bits are they can tap on, or if there's specific things I need them to look at. So yeah, a little bit of a hidden feature, but you can add a whole bunch of text here inside of your ProtoPie file inside of ProtoPie Cloud. So that about wraps it up for today. Hopefully there were some tips and tricks in there that you didn't know about. If you want to get more of my videos as and when they come out, make sure you hit the subscribe button below, and hopefully I'll see you next time.